I have gone through this book about 9 times over the last year or 18 months, over and over again. And there's so much richness in it. And I'm really hoping that what's shared has a practical and quantifiable impact on your life and helps you in some way, because it really has for me. The book serves as a wonderful blueprint for a timeless teaching that's been around for a very long period of time. And I know there's a lot of opinions and a lot of different ways of looking at Jesus Christ, who he was, what his teachings really were. I've chosen this book because what Emmet Fox did was try to remove himself from all of the theology or the structure or the dogmatic nature by which some of these pure teachings came about. On page 13, he says, if you really wish to alter your life, if you really wish to change yourself to become a different person altogether in the light of God and your purpose, if you really want health and peace of mind and spiritual development, then Jesus and his Sermon on the Mount has clearly shown you how it is to be done. My aim here is to soak out the most pertinent pieces of information from this translation in a way that can help you in your spiritual development, help you uncover a higher level of purpose, maybe get some clarity on some issues that you're dealing with right now. And I think striving for purpose, striving to have our potentials unleashed in this lifetime is a wonderful, powerful quality of human beings. For years, I felt guilty around the idea of trying to live an extraordinary life or trying to have great circumstances or whatnot. But then I realized that the best way that I could serve my family, my friends, my community, the world at large was to shine my light as much as I could and to do everything that I could to become that best version so I could serve as an example for others. And I think that's really embedded in what we're going to cover throughout this book. There's probably 9 to 12 major practices or themes in this book. And these are perspectives and ideas. And he names them up front. On page 3, he says, the plain fact is that Jesus taught not theology. Whatever his teaching is entirely spiritual or metaphysical. Okay, so right up front, he says that he's not teaching theology. He's not teaching a religion. His teaching is an energy. It's metaphysical. It's spiritual. Okay, which is why it's timeless, and why it's around 2,000 years later. So this, again, is going to be a non-dogmatic, non-religious, all-inclusive environment where we're going to follow Emmet's lead and really try to understand those pure teachings. And he says on page 6, when the spiritual is right, the details will take care of themselves, right? And don't we find that to be true? When the deepest layer of ourselves is okay, is aligned, then all the other stuff on top of it tends to work or be in flow. And so this is an exploration into the root cause, the source energy of how we work, of how we operate. This is the deepest work there is, in my opinion. And there's other deep things, but we're going to the root here. We're going to the source energy of how we operate, of how energy flows. So it's a spiritual, it's a metaphysical teaching that has all these different layers upon it. And then it gets to the main point that there is a spiritual key that Jesus taught. He says, the spiritual key unlocks the mystery of the Bible teaching in all the Gospels. The key explains the miracles and shows that they were performed in order to prove to us that we too can perform miracles and thereby overcome sin, sickness, and limitation. So he's setting it up saying, there's a main point to the Jesus teaching, and we're going to go ahead and explore it in that context. Then on page 13, he names it, which I'll do now. And he says, and the truth turns out to be nothing less than the amazing but undeniable fact that the whole outer world, whether it be the physical body, the common things of life, the winds and the rain, the clouds, and earth itself, is amenable to a person's thoughts, in that we have dominion over it when we know it. Okay? So the entire Jesus teaching is summarized there. And breaking it down a little bit, the external world, everything on the outside, is simply a projection, a manifestation of what's going on the inside, of mind, of thought, of thinking, of our emotions, is expressed and being seen on the outer. Now, you may have come to that, you may have explored that in your lives, but I love the simplicity about which it's stated. But it's an interesting statement, the way he says it, because he goes so far to translate Jesus as saying, it's amenable to a person's thoughts, meaning that we can have an impact over how we're thinking, so that way the outer circumstances change. And when we know that, we have dominion over it, meaning that we have control or power to control the outcomes of our lives. So that's the basis of what Emmet Fox has been translating for Jesus, that we have the ability to change outer circumstances through our thinking, and that's the work, right? So he starts off with the grand truth, the big one, the thing that you've been playing with your whole lives, most likely. I know the people that are attracted to this call from my communities have done work on themselves. You've reached that point of awareness at times, but now we're here to really ground this in and really play with it. Because when I started reading that and reading the practices that follow, it really started to change my default orientation towards this truth. And I started to have some real life results. He then says, life only has the character that we give to it by our thinking. I love that line, right? It's kind of like the flavor of our life, the flavor of our relationships, the flavor of our relationship with money, the flavor of everything that we're doing, our work, right? It's all coming from inside. It's humbling to really go to that point that as much control as we think we have in our thinking is creating it all, it's actually coming from the inside first. So our thinking is giving the character of our lives. The perceptory level is what counts here. And then he says on page 14 that to accept this truth is the great first step, right? So we just have to start there. We start there, that this is true. We're going to play a little experiment here and say, okay, this is true. Like everything's around the way that I think. And now that I know that, it's amenable to how I think. And I can now start experimenting with practices and methods, which is what the rest of this book is, to explore the power of that. And now we're going to talk about how do we get there? How do we really start to live this way? How do we really start to live in this life of ultimate surrender and flow? Okay. And he says on page 21, it means to be willing to set aside your present habits of thought, a willingness to set aside your present views and prejudice in your present way of thinking. And if necessary, to jettison anything and everything that can stand in the way of your finding God or truth or purpose. So right from the get-go, he's giving us an edict which says, okay, well, we have to be willing. We have to be open-minded. We have to be willing to change the way that we're thinking. You can't just change the way that you're thinking. You have to want to do that. You have to be willing to set aside your present views and any prejudice that you might have in your present way of living. And then he goes so far to be very strong. And there's a lot of strength in this book where he says, it's necessary to jettison anything and everything that stands in your way of finding God. There's a real strong passion and calling to always turn towards the divine in this text. A real strong yearning that our gaze should always go towards the divine, should always go towards the energy source, God, whatever you may call it. So really having that openness to doing things differently. And I got to just tell you that I'm a big Seinfeld fan. And there's a line in the Seinfeld show, believe it or not, that I love. And it always reminded me of this. And I'm going to share with you because I like to have fun. In Seinfeld, there's a character named George, and he's talking to Jerry and he's complaining about his life. Things are terrible. Nothing's working. Everything is off. He doesn't have a girlfriend. He's got no job. He's got no money. And Jerry says to him, he said, hey, maybe you should just try the opposite. And George's like, what do you mean? He's like, well, if everything you do is inherently wrong, then the opposite must be correct. And this light bulb goes on off George's head. And he's like, huh, yeah, maybe I should do the opposite. Maybe I should just do the opposite and I'll get different results. Then he goes up to this woman that's sitting at the counter and he says, hi, my name is George. I'm bald. I'm unemployed and I live with my parents. How are you? She turns, she's like, oh, hi, nice to meet you. And of course, he has a very pleasant interaction. But I think the point is valid that we need to have flexibility in terms of our belief structures. It starts with that intention. And I think that's something that we could all work on and do better. Okay, so then on page 23, he says that mourning or sorrow is not in itself a good thing, for the will of God is that everyone should experience happiness and joy, your success. And then he says, quote, there's no need for men or women to have trouble because if you will only seek God first, the trouble need never come. And that's another pretty strong point. This notion that the nature of God, of the God force, is ultimately positive, that the true intention for all of us is that we should have happiness and joy and success. And I struggled with this one for years. And the reason why I struggled, and I can still hear my own voice rationalizing the other side of that, which is, well, we need the darkness, we need the shadow, we need the tension. There's got to be the polar opposite in order for there to be the good, the joyful, and the happy. And so do we need the polarity? Do we need all of it? Well, of course we do. The joy and happiness and success that he's talking about here is seen from the observer state, the witness state, where we have the ability to step out of the polar reality that we tend to live in almost all the time and see all of it as God, all of it is one thing, all of it is energy, all of it is manifestation. And from that vantage point, mourning or sorrow or pain or loss or suffering isn't the will of God. That from that vantage point, actually, it's a transcendent joy, a transcendent success, something to strive for, right? Something to believe in. So when I heard this, I was like, yeah, like, okay, like I'm game. Like, what do I need to do? How do I need to practice to get there? This sentence for me is an end to victimization. The idea and feeling that it's external circumstances that are causing the things in my life, the way that I feel, where I feel less than, or I don't feel great. It's a true end to it. And it's tough medicine in a sense, right? But we know that it's the big truth, the big T with the capital T, the fact that it's meant to be joyful. It's meant to be good.